In this video, I'll be showing you how to make a custom date picker using vanilla JavaScript. So before we go ahead, I'm going to quickly demo you this project. So as you can see on the screen, I have this div over here which shows the selected date. This is nothing but the current local time that I am in. So currently while I'm recording this video, the date is 17/06/2022 and that is what's being displayed over here. And now when I click on this, you can see this date picker become visible. Now in this date picker, you can see that this part over here shows the current month in which we are at along with the current year. And right below that, it displays the number of days within that month. So I can click anywhere in this dates list. Suppose I click on 12, then you can see this date changes over here. So wherever I click, you can see the date changing on top. Now I can also switch to different months. You see, if I go to July, then July has 31 days and it shows here to be 31. And if I go to the next date, which is August, August has 30 days, so it updates accordingly. And if I go to February, then February has 28 days and it updates accordingly. So I can choose any date that I want, and this will again update based on whichever date I choose, no matter what month I want to choose from. And lastly, you can see if I go back and I go before January, then it shows December 21. So it also updates the year accordingly. And if I choose any date over here now, then over here you can also see the year updating accordingly. And I can also move forward, and when I go after December 22, it's going to update to January 2023, exactly how we want. And I can select a date, and over here as well, it's going to update accordingly. So this is what we're going to build, and you're going to learn a ton of JavaScript concepts while building this project. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. So I have this very basic setup over here. This is just the index.html file, and I have a script.js file which is empty, and a styles.css file which is empty as well. So I'm going to go to my index.html file and I'm going to start building the UI first of all. So within this body tag, all I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all create a div, and this is going to be the parent div for the entire date picker. So let's just name this something like date picker wrapper. All right. Now within this div, I'm just going to save this once, and I'm going to go to my build. And initially this is the state that we require. Now this is going to be the entire date picker wrapper, and when I click on this, this part becomes visible. So this entire thing, all of this that you see, is going to be within the date picker wrapper. And in the initial state, you can see within this date picker wrapper, we have this date selected. So what we can do is I'm going to go to my code, and over here within the date picker wrapper, I'm just going to create a div, and I'm going to call it nothing but, let's say, selected date. All right. And then after this, I'm going to go down, and then you could see in our actual build that all of these dates are also within the entire date picker wrapper. So I'm going to go right down here, and then I'm going to create a div which is going to hold all the dates right under the selected date. So I'm going to call this class of, let's say, dates container, since this is going to contain all the dates. And then within this class name of dates container, the first thing that we need is the arrow and the months that we have. So the first thing within this selected date is this arrow, the month, and this other arrow that we have. So we are going to wrap all of this within one div, and we're going to call this div nothing but month. And within the month div, I'm going to create 3 child divs. Let's call this class of arrows, and then let's name it previous month. All right. And over here, I'm going to give it that arrow sign that we have, and we can do that by lt and then this. And after this, I'm going to create another div which is going to have a class of nothing but month item. And this month item that we have is going to be dynamically populated using our JavaScript logic. And then over here, we are going to do the same for the right arrow, or the basically next arrow. So we can name this something like next month. And over here, I can give the symbol of and GT. And after this, you can see the last thing that's remaining is the dates itself, the dates and the number of days that's present over here. So all these individual dates, let's put them inside another div, and we can just call it something like, the days container or something like that. So right after this month, what I'll do is I'll create another div. I'll give it a class of nothing but days container. All right. So within the entire dates container, we will have the month and the days container. So with this is going to be the dates container. Within that, we'll have the month and the days container, and the days container is going to include all the days, the individual days. All right, so this is all we need to make for the HTML. And also initially I'll just make sure that I add a random date over here so that when we make the styles we can at least view the styles. Later on obviously I'll remove this and I'll add everything dynamically. So I'm just gonna say 06010, something like 2022, and here as well in the month let's give it a default date, something like June 22. All right, let's make this 1706 instead. Alright, so this is all for the HTML. We are obviously going to remove these later on because we need to dynamically populate this. For styling purposes, I've just kept it like this for now. Now I'm going to go to my styles.css and I'm going to start building the UI of this. So let's see what we have in our actual build right now. As of now, we just have this simple thing over here, the selected date and the month. So let's style this up properly now. I'm going to remove this console. So in the styles, first of all, let's give some default global styles. Let's just make the margin to 0 and the padding to 0 as well, and the box sizing to border box. And we'll also give some style for the body. Let's give it a background color of black and a font family of, let's say, this one. All right, now after this, what I'm going to do is we also need to give this text of custom date picker. I'm just going to copy this ASAP and I'm going to go to our HTML file, and then over here on top I'll just write a simple h1 which says custom date picker. This doesn't matter as much, but let's just add it. And then back in our styles, I'm just going to style that h1. I'm going to give it a margin of 30px and 0px, and then I'm going to give it a color of white. And after that, I'm going to say a font size of nothing but 42px. And after that, a font weight of, let's say, 900. After that, a text align of center. All right, let's go and check what we have for now. All right, you can see this text custom date picker and everything centered out properly. Now we just need to render out the date picker and style its UI, and then we'll go ahead and write the JavaScript logic. So first of all, let's go and style the date picker wrapper. Remember, the date picker wrapper is going to be wrapping everything, like everything that we have over here. All right, so I'm going to give this a position of relative. I'm adding position relative over here because initially we will just have this, right? This will be the entire date picker wrapper. When I click on this whole thing is gonna come out. They're all gonna have their own divs, but still all of this will be within the date picker wrapper. So if I keep this part over here relative, so what happens is, when I click on this and this whole div comes out, this div can have a position absolute and I can give it a top 0, and then that will make sure that it gets attached to this part over here. All right, so that's the reason why I have added position relative over here in this date picker wrapper, which is initially going to be like this. And then obviously based on when we click, we can toggle a class and display the other stuff. And if you didn't understand what I'm talking about, then you'll get a far better idea as we keep going ahead. So after the position of relative, I'm going to give this a width of 100%, and then I'm going to give it a max width of somewhere around 300px, and after this I'm going to give this a height of somewhere around 60px, then a background color of, let's say, RGB 58, 86 and 183. After this I'm going to give it a margin of 30px auto, and we're just going to give it a cursor of pointer, and I'm also going to add a user select of none. All right, so now if I go and check what we have, this is our final build. If I go to my actual build, this is what we have. We have this part exactly looking like this. So all right, let's go ahead and add the styling for the selected date that we have. Selected date is nothing but this part over here, 1706. What I can do for now is I can just remove this month over here, but we'll keep this over here because we're busy styling this part. I'm going to go to my styles back again, and I'm going to say dot selected date, and I'm going to add a width of 100% and height of 100%. After this, I'm going to give it a display of flex, a justify content of, let's say, center, and align items of center to center it all within that date picker wrapper div. And then I'm going to give it a color of white, And after that, I can just give it a font size of 28px. Alright, so now let's save this, go back to our browser, and this is what we have. Now this looks exactly like our final build. Now we just need to make sure that whenever I click this, that div starts rendering, which contains all the dates and the month. So we need to make sure every time we click on this div that we have, we need to be able to display this entire div, which contains the days and the month, because we have this part already visible, right? So for that, I'll just go ahead and add some JavaScript logic so that we can render that out first. So before I go ahead and add the logic, I'm just going to make sure that I add the CSS for this particular div over here, because this is the div which is containing the entire part within that drop down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this div, and I'm just going to give it a few styling. Now this initially needs to have a visibility of hidden, and I'm going to give it a position of absolute, so that when I click on that and it renders, this part stays attached to this particular div, right? So that's the reason I'm giving absolute over here, because that will allow me to position this wherever I want. So what I can do is I can give this a top of 100%, a left of 0, and then let's say a right of 0. So this will be completely stuck to that div above it. All right, and then right below this, I'm going to make another class named active, and all I'm going to do here is I'm going to give it a visibility of visible. So initially this will be hidden. Every time I click on that particular div, it's going to toggle this active class to this class over here. So this will become visible, and I will show you what I mean by that now by implementing the logic. So first of all, let me make a selector for the date picker element, and I'm going to say document.query selector, and I'm going to write dot date, let's say date picker wrapper. This is going to select the entire date picker wrapper. It's going to make this more visible. All right, date picker wrapper. And then I'm going to select the selected date that we have. I'm going to say selected date element equals to document.query selector, and I'm going to say selected date. All right, the spelling of this is wrong, selected date. All right, and then after this, let's make the selector for the dates element which we have. Dates element is also going to be document.query selector, and I'm going to say dates container. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste this few more times, because we are going to create the selectors for all the elements that we have. I'm going to call this month element, and I'll change this div over here to month and then month item. This should be MO. All right, and then right over here, instead of month element, it should be the next month element for the next arrow that we have. So here I'm just going to say month and then dot, let's say next month was the class that we had, and I'm going to copy this because the next one's also going to be previous next element. Oh my bad, this is going to be previous month element, and over here I'm going to copy this whole thing, paste it here, and instead of next over here I'm going to write this as previous. All right, and lastly, this variable needs to be named as the days element for the days container selector that we have, and let's name this days container. All right, so now I have all these elements created, all the variables selecting the elements created. So now the next thing before I do that, there's one thing I realized, that over here in the dates container we need to make sure that we add a background color of white. And why I'm doing this, you'll understand better. We don't need this necessarily, but I'm doing this to help you understand something that we are going to see right now. All right, so I'm going to go to my script, and now what we need to do is over here in this div, whenever I click on this div, what should happen is that date picker should toggle out. So whenever I click on this, that date picker should be visible, and when I click on this again, it should become invisible. So basically we need to toggle that active class that we had, right? This active class that I had created over here. So this makes this dates container over here visible. All right, so currently it's invisible, it's hidden, we need to make it visible. So for that, the first thing we need to do is we need to attach an event listener and a click event listener to this date picker element, because this is the entire date picker element, right? The date picker wrapper. So all that I'm going to do first is I'm going to say date picker element dot add event listener, and we're going to listen for the click event, and upon click we're going to call toggleDatePicker. And now I'm just going to go ahead and create this function itself. I'm going to say function toggleDatePicker, and over here we can obviously pass the e, because an event listener automatically attaches the event to the function that it's been assigned to. After this, before I proceed, I just want to make sure that I add a background color of white over here. This is not quite necessary, but I'm writing this in order to help you understand some part of the logic that I'm going to write. Later on we can remove this. Now the reason we wrote this function was to toggle that class, right? So whenever I click this, that active class should toggle and that whole date picker should be visible. So currently we already have this dates container present, right? But it's just invisible. Now we need to make it visible. So when I click this, I need to toggle that active class. So what we can do in this toggleDatePicker is in write dates dot element dot, oh sorry, this should be dates dot yearly dot class list, and I'm going to toggle nothing but the active class. All right, I'll just save this now, and I'll also make sure that I add the month over here back again. This June 2022, let's say, because we just want to visualize that this is working. So now if I save this, and upon clicking that date picker wrapper that we have, we should be able to see the month element. So you can see this over here, and if I click on this, there you go, you can see this div becomes, this dates container div becomes visible, and it has the month within it. So now if I click on this date picker on top over here, you can see this becomes invisible again. Now this is happening because of the toggle that we added over here. This is toggling that active class on and on again. So if I just if I just inspect on this, and if I drag this a little down, and if you can see if I click here, then right over here, just going to extend this, you can see this active gets added and then it goes away. It gets toggled back again and then it goes away. That is happening because of the toggle. But there is a problem over here. If I click on this and this dates container pops up, and if I click on this dates container as well, you can see it hides again. Now that is not what we want. As you can see in the final build, only when I click on this element over here, the entire thing under it gets hidden. So if I click anywhere over here, none of this gets hidden. See, nothing gets hidden, but if I click here, it gets hidden. So now we also need to make sure we do the same for this, because we don't want this to be hidden when we click anywhere on the dates, right? That's not feasible for us. So this part works fine, but we need to also add the functionality that whenever we click over here, it should not get hidden. It should only get hidden when we click here. So how to do that? To do that, we need to use something called the e.path, which JavaScript provides us. So a path is a property attached to the event. We need to make sure we use that property. So what does that property do? I'm going to first console log e.path, and let's see what happens when I do that. I'm going to go to my console, and when I click on this, you can see I get something in the console. And if I open this up, you can see I get 6 elements over here. So what exactly are these? So what happens is, what e.path does is, whichever element I click on, the e.path returns me the path of that element that I clicked on from the window itself. So if I clicked on this div over here, the e.path is going to return me the path of this div from the complete parent in the screen. So basically, since I clicked over here, you can see I get returned window first, then the entire document, then the HTML element, then the body, then the date picker wrapper, and then at last the selected date, because I clicked on the selected date. So it returns me the path of the div selected date from the window itself. So basically, whichever element that I click on, this e.path should have that element within it, right? This e.path should have that element within it, and if that element is present within that e.path, then it means we did click on that element. For example, if I clicked here, then this e.path does contain the DatePicker wrapper and the selected date. So this will just help us check the element that we are clicking on. And now this is going to help us because I can add a logic of some sort which can check if that element is contained or not in this entire e.path, and based on that I can toggle this. Now to help you understand that better, I'm going to write the logic and I'm going to dry run you everything that I write so that you can get a clearer understanding. All I'm going to do now is I'm going to wrap this within an if statement, and I'm going to say if not check class exist, and then in this function we will pass two parameters. One is the e.path and the second argument is nothing but the element that we want to check for. So dates.container, I'm going to put this part within this if statement right here, and I will explain you what all of this means, what I'm doing. Don't worry about it, don't get overwhelmed, just hold on. I'm going to create this function and then I'm going to say path and let's say elements or element, and then I'm just going to write a for loop. I'm going to say let I equals to 0, I less than path dot length I plus plus, and then over here after this I'm going to write a if statement and I'm going to check if class list exists. If it does, then I'm just going to say path of I dot class list dot contains, whether it contains the element or not, and if it does, then I'm just simply going to return true, and if not, then after the for loop I'm just going to return false. Alright, so you must be wondering what the heck have I written over here. So I'm going to quickly explain you what I've done over here. So as you know, as I explained, the e.path returns us the path of the element that we click on from the window till the element that we have clicked on. So what's happening here is the first time when I click on this, the first time right now, since no div is visible underneath this, when I click on this wrapper, what happens if it checks if the checkClassExist returns us true or false. Only if it returns us false, we go ahead and we toggle the active class. And as you remember, the active class, when it gets toggled, it shows us the div underneath which contains the dates. So when this checkClassList is called, it passes the path and a string that we are manually passing called dates container, because we want to toggle the dates container, right? The entire dates container div that is present over here. So what we are doing inside this function is we are looping through all the path. So when I first time click this, right, you see when I first time click this, we only get the DatePicker wrapper and the selected date, because when I first time clicked this part wasn't visible, right? This part wasn't visible. So we only had the DatePicker wrapper and the selected date. So what we are doing in this for loop is we are looping through all the paths. We're looping through all the paths that e.path provides us. So we loop through window, document, HTML body, this DatePicker wrapper, selected date, and if path of I.classList exists, we are just checking if the individual class lists exist, and if that class list contains the element which we are passing as dates container. So what happens is the first time when I had clicked this becomes visible, because as you can see, when I clicked this the first time, this part wasn't visible. So the dates container class was not there in the path because this part wasn't visible. And I clicked over here, so it's going to show me the path from the window till the element, till the path of this element. And until the path of this element, we didn't have any dates container. So for the first case, when I clicked this, dates container wasn't there. So because date container wasn't there, it looped through each of those class lists. It couldn't find dates container anywhere, and it ended up returning false. And over here we had given this not sign. So if this function, this not just indicates that if this function returns false or not. So since this is returning false, since it is returning false, so we are doing if not checkClassExist, which in this case is false because this function is returning false for the first time we click on that wrapper. If it is false, then we go ahead and we toggle the active class. And that's the reason why when the first time I clicked on this, since it did not have the dates container, and when we checked if that function returns false, which it did, then we will toggle the active class, and then this got toggled. That's the reason why this part is visible to us. Now you can see if I click on here, you can see that this doesn't close anymore. If I click on here, no matter how many times, this doesn't close anymore. So we have fixed that issue, and this doesn't close anymore because I'm just going to clear this console. I'm going to click this on this again, When I click on this, you can see 8 elements this time visible in the path. So when I open this div, you can see the elements that we get are window, document, HTML body, date picker wrapper, dates container, month, and the month item, right? All these items. So this time when this is visible and I click on this, you are able to see the dates container. So basically what happens is when I click on this again, this toggle date picker gets called again because this is attached to the entire date picker element, right? This toggle date picker gets called again. It calls this function again, passing dates container, but this time when this is visible, as you can see over here, it does have the dates container path because I clicked on this and it has the date container path. So when it loops through each of those paths, it sees that path of i.classList contains the element, which is nothing but dates container. So when this is open, it does contain the dates container element. So in that case, it ends up returning true. And when this function ends up returning true, it doesn't go within this if statement. Right, because we only want to go into this if statement when it returns false, which was for the first case, when dates container wasn't visible in the path. So that's why when it returns true, we do not go within this if statement and the toggling doesn't happen again. Right, so that's the logic behind this. So that's why when I click on this, no matter how many times, it doesn't get toggled again, because when I click on this, it returns true because the dates container is visible in the path and we return true, and therefore the content within this if statement is never reached. But when I click over here again, then it closes back again. That's because when I had clicked on this again, that dates container wasn't visible again. So it returned false and it toggled it back. So as you can see again, I'll show you, I'll click on this. It shows that dates container is not there. So this dates container is not contained within this path. And then, so it goes out from this entire for loop and it returns false. And we already have this visible. So no matter how many times we click over here, it will not close because this time dates container is visible. So when dates container is visible, this will end up returning true and we will never go within this if statement. So it will never close. But the moment I click over here, dates container is not going to be visible anymore because we are checking the path of this element from the window. And when we click this, the path of this element from the window doesn't contain the dates container. So you can see when I click on this again, it doesn't contain the dates container anywhere. So therefore, this class list gets toggled again, and when it gets toggled, this whole part closes back again because we are making it invisible back again. So I hope you understood what I explained. I think I explained it pretty thoroughly. If you didn't understand, there is no problem watching that part of the video over and over again, and I'm sure you'll understand it. If you didn't, just mention it down in the comment section and I'll try to comment down the answer to it in a much more well formatted way again. Alright, so this allows us to have that toggling functionality. Now let's go ahead and add the styling for this part, the styling for the month and the arrows. Alright, so now I'm in my style.css file and I'm going to add the styles for the elements within the dates container. So first of all, I'll just go ahead and add the styles for the month that we have. To say display of flex, I'm going to give it a justify content of, let's say, space between, and then I'm going to say align items of center. And then I'm going to give it a color of, let's say, white, because the text was white in color, and a background color of RGB, and we're going to select this exact same color. Alright, so now after this, let's also style the arrows that we have. Month arrows, and this is going to have a width of, let's say, 35px, a height of 35px as well. Going to give it a display of flex. We're just going to center everything out properly. Align items center. Let's give it a color of white as well. Should be white. And in the end, let's give it a font size of somewhere around 14px. We don't want to make it too big. So after this, we are going to also add the styling for the hover. For when we hover on each of the arrows. So it's going to be pretty simple. Arrows, hover, background color, and it's going to be a lighter shade of that blue color. So I'm going to say 91, 122 and 227. So let me go and check in the browser what we have. Here you can see we have this styling all set perfectly, the month being shown with the year and all the proper styles applied accordingly, just similar to this. So we are done with this part, and now we need to go and handle all the things that's right below it, which is nothing but the days elements. and the individual day that needs to be added within it. So that's also going to be pretty simple. I'm going to explain you how I'm going to apply the styles for that. So let me just add days container. Let me go to my browser back again. As you can see over here, each week has 7 days, right? So we need to make sure that we divide this part into 7 subparts. So to do that, we can just use display grid provided by CSS to us. So that's going to make this thing pretty easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write display grid, and then I'm going to say grid template columns. Remember, if you want to give a specific number of columns or rows, then you always need to give it to the parent container that we have, and then the elements within it will automatically take that many number of columns or rows. So since this is going to be the container, and within this there are going to be the individual days, that's why applying the grid styling to this will put all the child elements within it in the columns or row of how much ever number we specify over here. So I'm just going to say over here repeat, and I can say 7 for one fractional unit because we want it to be divided into 7 columns, right? Now after this I can just say, let's say height, and actually to set the height I'm just going to add some CSS variables over here. So I'm going to go on top and I'll just say simply root, and then in the root I'm just going to say height 200px. There's another variable that I'm going to create. I'm going to call it box size, and I'm going to give it a value of 5. This is nothing, you can give it whatever value you want. I'm going to show you how I'm going to use this pretty soon. Let me just go down here. Over here in height I'm going to do nothing but just say height. Of course, to use that variable you have to declare this var over here, and then after this I'm just going to write grid auto rows, and this is going to have the calculation of nothing but var of height, and I'm going to divide this by the var of box size. And I'm going to exactly show you why I use this. This is actually used so that we keep the same size over every month that we trigger into. So what I mean by this is, if I go to my original build over here, then here you can see that I have this January 2023, then January, February, March, April. So all of these elements like January, March, April, May, they have elements coming down till here, right? So we don't have to do anything for that. Even if you don't use grid auto rows, this will stay as it is because all the elements are coming till here. So the grid that we have set, it always sizes the elements properly. But if we go to the month of February, it has 28 days and this part is empty. So if I didn't put that grid auto rows, then what would happen is all of these would try to resize in a manner where all these elements take up this entire container. And what that would do is it would add a lot of spacing in between these elements. So that would make things non-uniform. So if I went to different dates, things would be spaced in this manner. But if I would come back to February, this whole thing would be filled and these spaces between the elements would be more, and that would be pretty non-uniform. And since this is the final build, even if you don't get what I'm saying, when we do this in our actual build, when we finally get that result, when we finally start putting in all the dates, I'm going to comment grid auto rows out and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean if you still aren't clear with what I'm saying. So I'm just going to save this for now. So I have set this height and box size as variables over here. You could also directly write 200 by 5, 200px by 5. I have just set it as a variable so that you could also change, you could also basically set these variables from using JavaScript directly. So that's the reason I've just taken these as variables. You could also put it directly, no harm in that. And I have used this as 5 because I figured that taking a fraction of 5 really works for a total height of 200. And even if you change it into whatever height you want, so just 400, 500, whatever, if you divide by 5, then it really aligns all the elements, even with different heights, in a proper manner, in a proper fraction basically. So you could mess around with these values, it's up to you. So yeah, moving ahead from that, I'm just going to give this a background color of, let's say, RGB, and 54, 49 and 56. All right, because we need this to be slightly grayish, right? Slightly dark grayish. The days container that we have currently, it was white, and now you can see it's a little bit of dark grayish, exactly like over here. All right, so now let's start populating all these values. But before we populate those values, let's add the styling for the values so that when we add those values in the logic, using the logic, we will at least be able to see those values because we will have the CSS set for it already. So I'm just gonna select that day that we have over here, and I'm going to say justify content center, and then align items center as well, and a color of white. And this day that we have, it's going to be appended dynamically using JavaScript. So within this days container, so this HTML, in this HTML file, we have this days container. Within this, we are going to be appending each day. So that is going to be, we are going to use a for loop for that, for the number of days in the month. We're going to use a for loop, and we are going to add each of those days within this days container. Don't worry, we are going to see how that's done. So after this, I'm just going to say days container, we select day, and then hover. On hover, we want to give it a background color of 91, 122, and 227 should be a good value. And we will also be adding another parameter dynamically using JavaScript. And that's going to be the selected class that we have. So it's going to say .day.selected, and for that as well, we are going to add a background color of RGB. Let's say 58, 86, and 183. So when we hover, we want to have a lighter shade of blue, and when we select it, we want to have this a little bit more darker shade of blue. So as you can see over here, when I hover, there's this lighter shade of blue, but when I click on this, then there's a darker shade of blue. The one which is selected has a darker shade of blue. So that's what this does. All right, so now in our current build, we need to populate those dates, those days basically. So let's see how that's done. And I think for the CSS, this is all we need to do. We are pretty much done with the CSS. It's pretty simple and self-explanatory. So let's move ahead to the script.js file and add the final logics that we require. So if you're enjoying the video until now, please don't forget to like and subscribe, as it helps the channel grow and motivates me to make more and more content. So the first thing we need to do is declare a variable named months. All right, and this is going to be an array of all the months. So later on, we can render this individually in that months part that we have over here. All right, so here I have written all the months within this array that I have. So after this, I'm going to declare a few variables. I'm going to say over here, let date equals to new date. This is provided by JavaScript to us. It gives us the current date that we have. All right, so and after this, I'm going to say day equals to date dot get date. All right, so this is going to, I'm just going to hover on this, and says that it gets the day of the month using our local time. So whatever local time we are in, it gives us that exact day of the month. So that's why I've stored it in the variable day. All right, so after this, I can say let month equals to date dot get month. This is all provided by JavaScript, so it makes our life more easier. Let year equals to date dot get full year. All right, so we are done declaring these variables. Now after this, I'm also going to write something like this. I'm going to say let selected, let's say date equals to date. Should be let selected day equals to day. Let selected month equals to month, and then let selected year equals to year. Alright, so I'm declaring these variables and I'm assigning it to their respective variables present over here, because we need both these variables so that we can compare them later on, and based on that write up our logic. And if you don't understand this, as we go on ahead, you're going to understand better what I'm talking about. So just for now, remember that we are writing this selected date because this is going to be used to compare with this one, and this is going to be used to compare with this, and based on that we are going to perform some actions. So just to start off with, I'm just going to go to my index.html and I'm going to remove these hard-coded values over here, because now we're going to add them dynamically. All right, that's it. If you check in our browser, see this is empty now. So I'm going to go to my code again, and first of all, one thing we can do is we can add event listeners for both of these arrows, for the next and the previous arrows, right? Because they are also going to, because on clicking them, we're going to call a function and do something. So these are also going to be click events, and then I'll just copy this next month element. I'll paste it right over here and paste it here as well, and I'll make this previous. All right, and we are going to call different functions, right, on doing this. So I can just say over here, go to next month, and then I can do the same thing over here, like go to previous month, All right, and then we are soon going to create these functions. Let's just create them right over here, paste it, and I'm going to do the same for the previous one. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it here. All right, let's leave this empty for now. I'll soon write the logic for this. After doing all this, one other thing we can do is let's just populate the month that we have over here. That's going to be pretty simple, right? We can just use this. We have this month element right over here. We are going to access that. I'm going to say month element dot text content equal to months of month plus, and I'm going to give a space between this, plus the year. So what this is going to do is we have this months array over here. So in that months array, we are accessing the month, the number month, because this that we have over here, date.getMonth, as you can see here, it gets the month using local time and it returns us a number. So this will return us a number. So when we do months of that number, it's going to give us the actual month name from this array. And one thing to note is this month that we get, it starts from 0. So what JavaScript does is for the month of January, it considers it as 0. So the number returned is 0 for January. For February, it's 1, and so on. So currently my month is June, so it's going to return 5, not 6, because it starts from 0. So the way it's going to select over here is going to be like months of 5. And when that happens, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And 5 is June. So it should show me June in this place. Plus the year, which is 2023, and the year is returned by this. It gets us the year. You can see here, so it should show me June 23. So if I just save this and I go to my browser, and if I click on this, there you go, you can see the month properly visible to us. It shows June 2022. So now let's go ahead and just write the logic for these two functions, because they're going to be pretty simple. So let's start off simple. Of course, for the month, to go to the next month, I would first do month plus plus, and then I could just check if month is greater than 11. And remember over here, 11 is going to be December, because month starts from 0. I don't know why JavaScript does that, but it does. So 11 in this case is going to be December. So we are just checking that if the month is greater than 11, that means that particular year has ended. So what we are going to do in that case, if month is greater than 11, then month is again going to become 0. So it's again going to become January, and the year is going to become plus plus. Hope this makes sense. So what this means is if we keep pressing the next button and the month goes greater than 11, that means it's surpassed December. So we are going to make the month 0 again. So it's going to become January, and we are going to increment the year. So suppose the year was 2022, it's going to become 2023, and the month is going to become January after it crosses December. So after this, all we have to do is we just have to append it to the month element dot text content. We say months of month again, and plus it's going to have a space plus the year. All right, and I'm going to do pretty much the same over here. I'm going to copy this entire thing. I'm going to paste this here. I'm going to write month minus minus, and this time over here it's going to be if month is less than 0, then this will be month equals to 11 and year minus minus. All right, and this part is going to be the same. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go to my browser. I'm going to open this up, and if I hit the next button, this should go to July. Let's see. There you go. It goes to July, August, September, October, November, December. And now if I click next, this should go back to January, and this should increment to 2023. So if I click next, there you go. This works perfectly fine. And if I go back, then this also goes back. And when I hit January and I try to go back, it's going to go December, and the year is also going to change to the previous year. So all right, this works perfectly fine. Now let's go ahead and do the major part. The major part is populating all the dates over here, the dates that we have over here. So for that, one thing we can do is let's make a function called populateDates. So I'm going to go somewhere over here, and I'm going to write function populateDates. And since whenever I open this, I want the dates to be populated. So I need to make sure that this gets called right over here, right when our application loads. I'm just going to call this directly over here. And now let's add the functionality, let's add the logic for this. So in the populateDates, first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to select the days element, and we're going to change its inner HTML to empty all the time. Basically, every time we call the populateDates, the inner HTML of the days element needs to become empty, because if you're going to the next month, we want the dates to be re-rendered again, right? So this is going to, so the previous dates are going to be set to empty, and everything's going to be re-rendered again with whatever logic we write after this. So after this, I'm going to write a variable named total days, and I'm going to show you exactly what this does. I'm going to write a bunch of if statements right now, just a few. So what I'm going to do is if month equals to 1, so basically if month is February, then we need to make sure that the total days for that month is going to be nothing but 28. All right, because 0 is January and month of 1 is February. So for that, since this is a different case, we need to handle it like this. We're going to say the total days is 28, and then later on we're going to loop through it 28 times and render those individual day items. And then I'm going to say else if month modulus of 2 is equal to 0. Of course, if the month modulus of 2 returns a total of 0 as the remainder, then the total days is going to be 31. So I have total days equals to 31 for this case, because in JavaScript, as I mentioned, month starts from 0. So for the first one, which is January, there's 31 days. So that means whenever the month which is returned by JavaScript is returned as an even number, the total days is always 31. For example, you can consider if it's January, which is 0 month, which is the 0th month, considering how JavaScript returns it, then the total days is going to be 31. Similarly, if it's February, for February, we are handling it here for the month 1 because it's a different number all in itself. We're not going to consider that. So let's consider March. March has 31 days as well, right? And in terms of how JavaScript returns it, it's going to be the second element in the array, as in 0, 1, and then 2, meaning it's going to have the index of 2. When JavaScript returns March, it's going to return this month as 2, and March also has 31 days. So this means that whenever month is even, it's going to have a total days of 31. And then we can say else total days is going to be nothing but 30. And also over here where we have written total days equals to 28, this can also vary based on the leap year. You could write a logic for the leap year, and based on that you could change this value for total days for specifically the month of February, but I'm gonna skip that because that's up to you. You can do that if you want, but you get the general idea to how this works. All right, and now our only task is to loop through this total days variable that we have, that gets set based on the month that we are in, and accordingly render out that many number of days element. So all I'm going to say now is I'm going to run a for loop, let I equals to 0, and then I'm going to say I less than total days, and then I'm going to say I plus plus. For that, all I'm going to do is I'm going to declare an element, days element. I'm going to say document dot create element. Going to create an element of div, and then I'm going to say day element dot class list. Let's say class list dot add. I'm going to give it a class name of day, and remember in our CSS we had added the styling for day as well, right? It's going to have a color of white and so on. I added the class list of day, so all those 31, 30 or 28 elements, whatever, all those divs are going to have this class name of day. And after this I can just say day element dot text content equals to I plus 1. So this means that each of those divs which gets rendered, right, each of those divs are nothing but days, right? Each of these divs are days, but this starts from I equals to 0, but how we want in our date picker is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and so on, right? So as you can see over here, this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and so on. So if I just write I, it's going to start from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's not right. So that's why I'm just adding 1 to it so that it starts from 1. And then now you're going to see why I declared selected date, selected year and so on above. So I'm going to say if selected day equals to, let's say, I plus 1, and let's say the selected year equals to the year, and the selected month equals to the month, then in that case what we're going to do is just going to go back down, then in this case what we're going to do is we're going to say day element dot class list dot add, and I'm going to add the selected class. So what this is doing is just checking if the day that we selected, if that is equal to, of course, I plus 1, because it starts from 0. So to get the appropriate date, we have to do I plus 1. And if the selected year is equal to the year and the selected month is equal to the month. So initially when we open this date picker, so as you can see over here, initially when you open this date picker, it already has a number selected, right? So how are we going to get this selected? We are going to get this selected only by this comparison. If the current year is equal to the year which is initialized, if the month is equal to the selected month which is initialized, and the selected date is equal to I plus 1 in this case, only then we are going to add a class of selected to that particular individual div. And we have also added the styles for that over here, day.select, and we are going to give it this darkish blue color. So that's why we had this selected date, selected year, and so on, because so that we could compare it with the existing ones, and on the initial load we could be able to display the item which is selected. So this is going to help us, this comparison is going to help us decide the item which is selected and accordingly change its CSS as we are doing here. I hope you got what I meant. Now after this, all I'm going to do is I'm going to say day element, and I'm going to add an event listener. So I'm going to add an event listener of click, and I'm going to say function, and I'm going to write this function right away over here. So each of these individual days that we have, they also need to have a click event listener, right? Because as you notice over here, as I click on this, this changes the selected date, and this selected style also changes to this one. So we also need to add a click listener for each of these dates, and that's why I've added this over here. So, and the day element is of course each of these divs that I created, each of the day divs. So what we are going to do over here is we're going to say selected date. Whenever I select on something on a particular day, we need to make sure the selected date gets changed to the new date, right? So all I'm going to say is new date, and then over here I'm going to write year plus, and then I'm going to give this hyphen plus month plus 1, because month starts from 0. So but when we use this within new date, we need to make sure we do not pass month as how JavaScript returns it from 0, but we need to pass the actual month in its actual number format. So for example, if JavaScript returns January as 0, but we need to pass it as 1 if we really want to get the proper date format using this new date function. So after that I'm going to say plus, and then another hyphen, and then plus, I'm going to say I plus 1. So this is going to give me the year, the month, and the day, just as how we have mentioned over here. So this is going to take the year, the month, and the day, and it's going to give us the selected date. And then I'm going to do the same for the other selected variables. So selected day equals to I plus 1, of course. Selected month equals to month, and the selected year is equal to the year itself. And over here I'm just going to say selected date, this should be selected date element dot text content equals to the selected date. And then in the end, right after this function ends, I'm going to say over here days element dot append child, and I'm going to append nothing but the day element. So this days ELE is going to be nothing but over here is going to select the days container, and you can see the days container, and within that days container we are simply appending each of the day element that we created over here. And after adding click listeners and updating the dates and all, we are just going to append it to that container. So now let's just first go and see if the dates are being rendered or not. So if I open my browser and I click this, you can see all of those dates get rendered perfectly fine. And if I click on anything, okay, you can see if I click on this, then this is showing me this long huge value in this selected date, right? Because we are doing this selected date.element text content should become the selected date. So as you can see, this is not properly formatted. So we need to make a function that can format this the right way, so that we are ultimately able to view this like this. So but apart from that, you can see if I just refresh this and I go next, then it shows me One more thing you can notice that when I click next, this is not changing. The number is always staying as 30 days a month. So how do we fix that? So to fix that, all we have to do is in this go to next month and go to previous month functions, all we have to do is in the end we just need to call populateDates. All right, because every time we go to the next or the previous month, we need to make sure after all these values are changed, we call populateDates again so that the total days also change accordingly, right? And based on that, whichever month we are in, the total days will get updated based on this logic, and then we will loop through the whole thing again and we will render that many divs that we require, and accordingly all these will be set again as well. So that's why it's very essential to be able to call the populateDates again every time we go to next or previous month. If I save this and I go to my browser, if I open this up and I go to the next month, there you go, you can see this changed to 31. If I change again, this should become 30. There you go, it's 30, 31, 30, 31 and so on. And for the month of February, this should be 28. And now there's one thing that I need to explain you, which I had told you I would explain you later on. So you remember in the styles.css, if I scroll up, I had added this grid auto rows. Now why I had added this is because if I comment this out, you'll see what happens. If I comment this out, I'll just refresh this and I open this, you can see June has 30 days, this looks fine. May has 31 days, this looks fine, there's no extra spacing, nothing. April looks fine, March looks fine. But now when I go to February, you see it's trying to fill up this entire div. Then that causes this UI to look a little bit weird, because you can see every month has equal amount of spacing, but when we go to February, there's like more spacing between these elements, right? And that's happening because of this. That's happening because these particular grid columns and grid elements aren't constant in size. So if we just add this grid auto rows and we give it a specific value, it makes sure that it will always have that constant distance between each of those elements, no matter whichever month we go to. So that's the use of adding grid auto rows. I hope you understood that. So now another change we need to do is, let's go back over here, and you'll notice if I click anywhere, there you go, if I click this, you see this value gets appended over here, the selected month that we have, the selected date that we have, but it's not at all formatted properly. Over here you can see how perfectly well it's formatted, but here it's not formatted properly. So we need to make sure that when we add this selected date element.text content, we assign it to this selected date that we selected over here by passing in the year, month and day. We need to make sure that it's formatted properly, that this selected date is formatted properly. So what we can do is we can call a function formatDate, and within that we can pass this selected date and we can write a logic to format this selected date. So all we are going to do is, I'm going to just copy this right away, and underneath this I'm going to write it underneath this itself, and this is going to be a function. Now within this function I'm going to just format this selected date. So I'm going to say let day equals to selected date dot get date. So it's going to get the date for that selected date that we have, and then all I'm going to say is if day less than 10, then I want to make sure that I write day equals to 0 plus the day. All right, because if day is less than 10, as you can see over here, what happens is if day is less than 10, let's say that I'm going to select 8, then there's this 0 and 8 present over here, so we need to format and add that as well. So whenever it's below 10, there should be a 0 behind it, and then we're going to say let month equals to selected date dot get month, and then I'm going to add +1 to this because this starts from 0 again, the month that we get. So if we do that, then we can do something like this. If month is less than 10, then I can say month is equal to 0 plus month. All right, so if the month is also less than 10, so if it's 9, 8 or so on, it needs to add that 0 behind it. So over here you can see if I select any previous date, you can see whenever the month is July or before 10th, then it's always going to have this 0 appended behind it. So that's the reason behind this. And I'm returning +1 over here because the final selected date that we return over here in this text content, we don't want it to start from 0, right? We want the month to be the actual month number. Like if January, it should be 1, February it should be 2, and so on. So after this, I can say let year equals to selected date dot get full year, and then all I'm going to do is I'm going to finally return all of this in a formatted manner. I'm going to say day plus, I'm going to add a space over here, and then plus month plus a space over here again, and then a plus year. All right, so this should be giving us a properly well formatted date, and we have changed the order also to day, month, and year format. All right, so I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go to my browser. I'm going to go to our build, and if I click on this and I click anywhere, there you go, perfect. You can see the date perfectly formatted and coming on. So if I go to any other date and I click, you can see everything changes accordingly. If I go to March, changes. If I click on 18, it changes to 1803, and so on. Now there's one more bug that I realize. When I select any numbers, let's say I select 17 and I leave, it's not being selected over here. So over here you can see 10 is always selected. If I click on 19, 19 stays selected, but here we are not able to get that selected background color. So let's go ahead and fix that. So now to go ahead and fix that, all we need to do is right here above in this if statement, I realized that I made a huge typo. So over here I've written selected date equals to I plus 1 equals to I plus 1. So selected date is obviously the entire string that comes from here, right? So this is going to be nothing but that huge string that we were getting before, which we just formatted right now, which it's going to include the year, month, day with IST and all that. So we are doing the wrong comparison over here, and that's the reason it never goes within the if block. So obviously it makes sense that instead of date, this should be day. Selected day equals to I plus 1, selected year equals to year, and selected month is equal to the month. Only then we will append the selected class, because each day is going to start from 0 from this loop. So we are doing I plus 1, and then we're comparing it with the selected day. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go to my browser, and you will notice that now this 18 is selected. But you'll also notice something, that if I click anywhere else, this doesn't get selected. So if I refresh, open this up, only this stays selected. The current existing one that we have, it stays selected in the initial load, but whenever I change it, or when I go somewhere else and I try to click anything, it doesn't get selected. As in the style doesn't get applied, but this changes properly. So why does it still not get applied? The reason behind that is we need to go down here, and after we have added the selected date element.text content, and we have added the formatted text, we need to make sure that in the end we call populateDates again. Like this entire function that we have, we call this again. And that's because every time I click anywhere, you can see first of all that this works perfectly fine. Now if I go anywhere, this works. So the reason why I call this populateDates again over here is because once I select something, like once I click on something, so this selected day, month, year gets updated, and then we call this populateDates again, so that we can do this comparison all over again and append the selected class to that particular day element. And that's why whenever initially we call populateDates, the selected day over here, the selected date, day, month, year, and all of that, they are all equal to each other. And that's why for the first initial load, the class list gets appended properly, because these conditions run fine. But whenever we change the day, or we click on any new day, that's when we need to make sure that these selected day and all, they get compared again with the correct values. And that's why anytime we select any particular element, we call populateDates again, so that this condition can run again, and we can, and based on if it's true or false, we can again append the class selected accordingly. So that's the reason behind doing this. So now if you can see, if I refresh this, we are done with almost everything. When we select, the new dates gets appended, and the months change properly. We can go to 2023, whatever we want. The proper number of days are displayed down here. We are able to select things properly. Now the only thing remaining is, if I refresh, you see by default we are not getting the date, the current date of the day being displayed over here. So in order to fix that, this is going to be pretty simple. All we have to do is we can go onto the top. So all we can do over here is we can just write selected date element, And this selected date element is nothing but it's a selector for the selected date class. And over here we can just write selected date element dot text content is equal to, we'll call that formatDate function, and we'll pass in the date. So the same way we are doing it over here, right in the populate function, we just need to call that right in the beginning, so that on the initial load the selected date element gets populated with the current date that we have. So if I save this and I go to my browser, you can see initially also this has been populated with the proper selected date. So if I refresh, you can see this doesn't go away anymore, and if I change the date, this changes appropriately. If I go back and I change something, it changes again. I can go back to the previous year and change, and all the selected date also stays styled properly. I can go anywhere and I can perform the function, and if I click on this part of the date picker, then it doesn't get closed. It only closes when I click over here, and it pops back right out when I click again over here. So the toggling also works fine, all the functionalities work fine. We're able to switch between dates, select, display the dates properly. So yeah, now we are completely done with building this project. All the functionalities work fine. So I hope you learned a lot from this video, and I hope you learned to implement a lot many important and essential JavaScript functions, which is going to help you a lot if you're asked to ever make your custom date picker in your company, or you just want to learn something new, or if you're asked to build this during a live coding round at the interview. So if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, as it motivates me to build more. And of course, as usual, stay tuned for more.